Hi, and thank you so much for joining us for this presentation on showcasing your international experience to employers as part of the Global Opportunities After College Fair. We will take a moment to introduce ourselves and then dive right in. So I am Marissa Crowley. I am a college career mentor in the Career Education Office at Wellesley College.
And I am Christiana Graves Floss, and I work in the Office of International Study at Wellesley College. And later in our presentation, we will also be providing you with helpful information about connecting with career centers at all of your respective colleges.
Excellent. Okay, so here is our agenda for today. First, we're going to go through some introductory reflection questions to get you thinking about your experience abroad. We're going to talk about an employer perspective on study abroad and the concept of transferable skills. And then we're going to walk through a three-part activity: reflect, connect, and professionalize. You see a little description here of what each of those is, and we will talk about them in more detail as we're walking through them together. As part of Professionalize, we're going to cover elevator pitches, resumes, and cover letter strategies. And then we're going to look to the future a little bit and provide you with some resources and contact information so that you can continue to work on this and follow up with the offices at your own colleges to think about your own study abroad experience and how you can connect that to future employment and graduate school.
Below are some discussion questions that can help you to reflect on your experience abroad. Even if your experience abroad was cut short, it was nonetheless a learning experience that presented opportunities to practice certain skill sets and demonstrate traits such as adaptability. And even if your experience was shortened, it offers the opportunity to consider how this experience might relate to and influence your future goals. So some important questions to think about are: what was the most impactful experience during your time abroad? What made it so impactful to you? Can you brainstorm ways to stay connected to what inspired you about that experience? How can you maintain or create that feeling of impact and energy? What goals had you set out to accomplish before or at the start of your experience abroad? Brainstorm how these goals can be adapted to the current situation and how you can still maintain momentum around those goals. What were some of the most meaningful relationships you developed abroad? And how can you continue to maintain those relationships and stay in touch with those contacts? What about you and your perspective has changed in a positive way as a result of your study abroad experience? How do you think this experience will continue to impact your perspective in the future? Some things to think about could be your identity, your political views, your career goals, your contributions to your campus, community, or the world beyond, your feelings on home, your relationship with time, your personal style, the role of family in your life.
Great. So Christiana just walked through a number of useful questions you can use to reflect on your study abroad experience and think about all the ways that it was valuable to you. And in this presentation, we're then going to focus on how to convey that value, the significance of that experience to an employer. Now, the fact is that education abroad, just like any other experiential learning that you may have during your life, is not inherently advantageous to your career, right? Just because you volunteered or just because you had an internship, it's not necessarily going to give you a big advantage. It is perceived as advantageous only when the person who's done this experience, like study abroad, is able to clearly articulate how they used that experience to obtain the knowledge, skills, and abilities that the employer needs. So you really need to think about, how has this experience that you had contributed those skills, knowledge, and abilities that you want to convey to an employer? That's what you really need to think about and identify. You can think about how this international experience prepared you to be a strong candidate for a specific position and how it relates to and benefits that organization. The question you ultimately want to be able to answer for yourself is, how has your experience abroad impacted your life and your career goals? And those questions that we looked at on the previous slide will help you to think that through so that you can articulate it convincingly to a potential employer or a graduate school. When you are doing that, this concept of transferable skills is going to be so important. So, transferable skills, as you can see here, are skills that are gained in one context and can be productively applied in a separate or completely different context. Now, we all have transferable skills from every area of our lives, right? Um, Managing your personal budget during a vacation gives you skills that you could also apply in the workplace, for example, with organization and keeping track of deadlines and finances. Classroom projects that you've worked on have given you transferable skills in teamwork or deadline management and things like that. So we can always take what we learned in one place and make it relevant and transferable to another context. Transferable skills are usually what we want to really highlight on a resume, in a cover letter, and in an interview. So learning how to identify and articulate your transferable skills is a really important part of your career development process, and it will be throughout your life. The steps that we think about as we're trying to identify the transferable skills from study abroad that might be relevant to future employment are first to identify specific skills that you learned or developed abroad. And then try to move beyond proficiencies that are tied to a very specific culture or place and focus on what is transferable about those. So, for example, maybe while you were abroad, you really focused on learning a particular dialect of Spanish. That's great. That is a skill that you learned. But that particular dialect of Spanish might not be transferable to a future employer. Instead, something like verbal communication skills or cross-cultural communication or adaptability are the types of transferable skills related to your specific skill, and they're the ones that an employer might be better able to identify with. You're going to connect those skills that you brainstorm to the specific competencies employers are seeking in order to highlight the value added by your participation in an international experience. And then showcase those, broadcast them loudly to really demonstrate how that international experience helps you to stand out from the pack. Now, the way I just said that, it sounds like a lot to work through, right? Don't worry if you're feeling confused. We are going to break this down and walk through it together step by step. This is the three-step process that we use to do that. First, reflect. Think about the many components of your study abroad experience. What did you learn from each, and what skills did you develop? And then, once you have that list, connect. Determine how these specific skills are transferable to the workplace, and specifically to the qualifications your employer desires. And finally, professionalize. Learn how to share that experience in ways that highlight the attributes that prospective employers in your field are looking for. And this really means knowing how to talk about those transferable skills on your resume, on your cover letter, in a personal statement, or in an interview. So we will start out with reflect, the first step in our process. We're going to reflect on each component of study abroad and think about what you learned from each. Now, here are some examples of the types of components that might come to mind for you. Think about your experience with academics. Were you directly enrolled at a different institution? Were you at an academic center? Were you learning a foreign language or doing experiential programs like an internship? When you think about your housing, what did that look like? Was it a homestay? Were you in an urban environment or a rural one, living independently in an apartment or in a residence hall? For the environment, again, was it rural or urban, and was that new or familiar for you? What was the size of the institution that you were in? Was it in a developed country, a developing country? What did that space you were inhabiting look like, and what did you learn from it? And then finally, community engagement. This could be internships, service learning, clubs, or organizations you participated in during your time abroad. These are just a few examples of the types of components that you might want to reflect on and the different factors that might have informed your learning and your skill development for each.
Great. Before we begin to reflect more thoroughly on the skills that you gained abroad, We want to highlight that regardless of the amount of time that you spent abroad, empathy and mindfulness are qualities that can be of value to many employers and can be commonly associated with experiences that you encountered abroad or while returning from abroad. Mindfulness can help us navigate stressful situations and extreme emotions by providing us with techniques to navigate these moments successfully. Professionally, employers value leaders and employees who can analyze a challenging situation and carefully consider thoughts and actions in response, instead of reacting in the moment without thought. To think about how this relates to your experience abroad, you might want to consider, what stressful moments did you overcome abroad? Are there any routines or actions you have taken in the past that facilitate a mindful state? What actions or routines helped you through the low points of your time abroad and during your return home? Given all of these lessons that you learned from your time abroad and the challenges that you might have faced while living abroad, what could you do the next time an obstacle presents itself? Your time abroad also required you to practice empathy toward a multitude of individuals facing unique life circumstances, including introspective empathy for yourself as you navigated new environments, and outrospective empathy for others as you began to learn more about people and their unique stories. Professionally, employers seek leaders and employees who lead with empathy, who effectively support others and advance the work by navigating obstacles and finding solutions. Think about situations during your time abroad and during your return home when you had to exercise empathy for others and for yourself. What empathy do you wish you had received from others as you encountered challenges abroad and during your return home? Are there situations in which you could have demonstrated more empathy for others?
Great. So with that mindful approach, we want you to walk through this activity and spend a few minutes thinking about the different aspects of your experience and writing down at least one thing you learned from each. Ask yourself how you have grown or changed as a result of each component of your study abroad experience. Think about those times when you had an aha moment abroad. What did you learn, gain, or develop in that moment? And just a reminder to try to focus, if you can, on general transferable skills, not necessarily location specific, right? So we're not going to say learned Spanish slang, but rather learned how to adapt to new vocabulary or verb usage in real time. That would be a good example of how to make it a slightly more transferable component. We'll give you some examples if you need them for what those components could be. Urban dorm living, classroom differences, environment, travel, networking, organizations, or even others, community engagement, internships or service, visa and immigration process, language immersion, volunteering, and more. So jot down the components on the pie that resonate with you and that really help to define your experience abroad. And try to think of at least one thing that you learned, gained, or developed through each of those. You're welcome to pause the presentation here while you take a few minutes to think this through, and then just hit play to start it up again when you're ready to move on.
Thank you. We hope you found this exercise helpful. This slide here presents an example of skills and lessons you may have learned that are relevant to each of the specific categories. For example, when you first moved into your dorm or apartment, you likely needed to exercise a high level of resourcefulness in determining where to purchase essential items such as cooking supplies, bed sheets, toiletries, etc. To add to this, you are navigating this situation in a city that is unfamiliar to you and possibly surrounded by a language that is unfamiliar to you. You might not have known what the word for pot or pan in the local language is, and you might not have known what the equivalent of a home goods in your host country is. How did you navigate this situation? In regards to traveling around your host country or traveling internationally while you are abroad, you might have encountered moments where you were on a train and you cannot properly understand the names of the train stops and you are unaware of how soon you will be arriving at your destination. What did this situation teach you about keeping calm under pressure, problem solving, and not being afraid to ask questions? Perhaps you had to figure out a way to communicate with the person next to you without using words if there was a language barrier between you.
Great. So hopefully you've been able to think through, use some of those great examples and your own experience to identify what you learned and the transferable skills that you gained from each of these components. Now that we have reflected on your experience and what you learned, we are moving to the second step in our process. After reflect comes connect, taking those things that you've learned abroad and connecting them to the skills that employers are seeking. You can make those connections to what you see in a job description, where they say preferred characteristics or preferred qualifications. That's a place you can connect. The top skills employers are seeking. We're going to talk about some of those in a moment. Values that are expressed in company mission statements or on their website, that can give you really good clues about the types of qualifications that a company is looking for. And of course, information you've gathered through networking, maybe talking with another student who's already had an internship with a particular employer or who has attended a particular graduate program to really learn more about what they're looking for. Here's what this process looks like. Essentially, we take the specific component of your study abroad experience, like language immersion, that would be a component. That you've already identified the specific skill that goes with it, which we see in the middle, improved Spanish language. And the transferable skill, in this case, is communication skills. Another example is the specific component of living with a host family. The skill was learning social etiquette in China. And the transferable skill is an ability to understand different points of view or to be adaptable. So here are some examples of how we really make this connection from a component to a specific skill to a transferable skill. And so look back at that list of skills that you have written on that pie and think about how you would broaden those to really highlight the transferable skills they represent that might be important or valuable to a particular future employer.
Here is a helpful list of skills that we've developed that you might be able to glean from the lessons that you learned while you were abroad. First, creatively solve problems by applying familiar concepts to unfamiliar situations. So for example, have you had to navigate an unfamiliar city in your home country? How did this experience help you navigate an unfamiliar city abroad? Contributing to an ethnically diverse team. Did you collaborate with students from other countries when completing class projects? Be self-confident, yet able to listen to and learn from people whose value systems differ from your own. Did you encounter readings and courses that maybe highlighted points of view that differed from yours? How were you willing to consider the strengths of their argument? Taking personal risks and acting independently. Did you travel independently while you were studying abroad? Be flexible and adaptable to rapidly changing situations. Perhaps you studied abroad in a country that faced political unrest or strikes by university students or staff or by public transportation workers. Have a command of the local language and be able to use it in practical situations. This is, of course, particularly relevant if you studied abroad in a foreign language destination. Imagine, forecast, analyze, or address situations, professional, academic, social, from a different cultural frame of reference. Maybe you attended a dinner party abroad during which you had to let go of notions of what makes a good host that were specific to your home culture.
Great. So we've talked about really identifying those skills, thinking about what is transferable about them, and trying to call out what is the employer going to care about, right? And that's sort of the missing piece of this equation so far is how are we supposed to know what that employer wants? As I mentioned earlier, sometimes we can find clues to that in networking conversations, job descriptions, or on company websites. Those are all great places to look to find out what types of transferable skills you might really want to be emphasizing. This is sort of an overall look that comes from the National Association of Colleges and Employers. from 2020, what are the key attributes that employers want to see on students' resumes? In response to these surveys, here are the top 10 attributes employers were looking for: problem solving, teamwork, analytical or quantitative skills, written communication skills, leadership, verbal communication skills, initiative, detail orientation, technical skills, and flexibility or adaptability. So I think you can see very clearly here from some of the examples we've talked through and from knowing your own experience that many of these are the exact type of attributes and skills that people gain while traveling abroad, and particularly when being immersed in a different culture, such as problem solving, verbal communication skills, taking the initiative, that flexibility and adaptability. So the types of skills that you have developed during your time abroad are in demand professionally. And that's what you really want to be able to articulate about your experience to show employers that that's the value of that experience that you can bring. Here's just a little collection of skills specifically for a pandemic and post-pandemic world, speaking to our current moment. This comes from Forbes last year. The most important skills that they identified in this moment are adaptability, communication, organization, creativity, and collaboration. So in addition to looking at a specific job posting, a specific employer website for what that particular role is looking for and might like to see in your background, these are some broader themes that you also might want to keep in mind as generally transferable and generally important to the modern workforce. Okay, so I want you to try now walking through this activity on your own, this connect. Remember, you're taking your study abroad component and the specific skill that goes with it that we talked about earlier in the presentation, and now try to take it to that third level and identify the transferable skill that comes from that specific skill. And see whether you can connect the transferable skills that you've thought of with competencies that employers are seeking in job candidates, either from a particular employer or role that you have in mind, or from some of the generally marketable transferable skills we just talked about on the previous slide. Again, this is a great moment to pause the presentation for a few minutes while you work through this exercise and rejoin us when you're ready. Okay, now that you have connected the different components of your international experience to transferable skills that are marketable out in the job market, we're moving into the third stage of our process, which is professionalize. The big question here is, how will you communicate all of this, all of what you've just thought about, brainstormed, and written down? How will you communicate it to a potential employer? As you're preparing an application and you're faced with that challenge of how do I get this across to them, ask yourself, what is most important to communicate to this potential employer about my experience abroad? What aspects of my experience abroad are relevant to this position or organization? And what are the best 2 to 3 stories from my time abroad that really exemplify the points I want to communicate? So it's not the case that in every application, you're going to need to cover every different specific or transferable skill that you've identified. You're going to really focus in on the ones that are most relevant to that particular job and employer, the ones that you think represent the biggest potential contributions that you can make to them. The places that you have the opportunity to communicate these transferable skills are in your elevator pitch, which you can use during a networking conversation, maybe at a virtual job fair, or during an informational interview, or during a formal interview for a position, as well as in writing on your resume and in your cover letter. So now we're going to work on how exactly we communicate all of this to those potential employers.
Fantastic. Do you get questions from family and friends that are exhausting and or frustrating to answer about the experience that you had abroad, or questions that you can't articulate the answer to? Maybe some examples are, how was study abroad? Just a very basic but complicated question. Or frustrating questions like, did you see monkeys in India? Why did you choose to study abroad when there are such good economics courses at your home school? These questions could end up seeming tiring or annoying as time goes on, especially if you haven't thought of how you might be able to sum up your experience briefly and succinctly. The elevator pitch is the compact answer to the ubiquitous question, so how was your study abroad experience? And figuring out a way to speak to this question will help you throughout your job search and also personally as well. So let's work through some questions to see how you might be able to respond to questions about your study abroad experience. Maybe you want to think about 3 words that come to mind when you think about your time abroad, or what you feel people most misunderstand about your time abroad. How has your experience abroad impacted your life and career goals? And on this slide, we have some great examples. First, my study abroad experience in London, England provided the opportunity to live in a really vibrant city. The visits to museums and historical sites allowed me to better understand the British culture. I learned a lot about myself in the process, as I had many conversations with locals who held different points of view than I hear at home. It challenged me to apply my learning and diplomatically share my point of view in a cross-cultural setting. Or, my time abroad in Peru was the most empowering and joyful experience of my life. I realized that there is a much bigger world out there and that the Peruvian people have a very rich, proud culture that more Americans would enjoy learning about. I was able to improve my level of Spanish to the point that I can carry on a conversation that allows me to express myself with some emotion and personality. I realized how closely language is tied to culture, which allows me to understand my home country better too. Overall, it was a very positive learning experience and one that has encouraged me to explore other cultures. So these elevator pitches do a great job of first highlighting the most salient aspects of the experience and the aspects that they most enjoyed, but they also describe the most significant lessons and skills they learned abroad, and also speak to how these skills relate to the future and future goals. For example, both describe how they are going to continue practicing these skills moving forward. The student who went to London wants to continue to apply what she learned to share her points of view in cross-cultural settings moving forward. And the student who went to Peru has expressed an interest in exploring other cultures moving forward. So these are great examples of a way that you can not only just speak about what you enjoyed most about your time abroad, but also relating that to what you're going to carry forward now that you've had that experience.
Perfect. Those are great examples. And this is really exactly what we talk about with so much of reflecting on the study abroad experience, just like on so many other experiential learning opportunities like an internship or volunteering somewhere. When someone asks you about it and you don't just want to say, it was great, and leave it there. But these examples, as Christiana said, really show you how to make it relevant, make it transferable, and show what you've gained from it. And that's exactly what we're going to aim to do in the resume as well. It is really important to include your study abroad experience on your resume because it gives you an opportunity to showcase what's unique about you as a candidate. Not every candidate for the job will have gone on study abroad, so it's something that an employer might remember about you or make you stand out. And the more that you can also use that opportunity to showcase some of those transferable skills that you gained from that experience, the better. So you can incorporate your study abroad experience in your resume in a number of different ways and places. This can go in the education section where you could list your coursework if it's related to the job search. Under the experience section, particularly if you did something like an internship or a research project while you were abroad, or if your resume includes an international experience section. That's also a place, of course, where you could put your study abroad experience. And finally, you can highlight foreign language skills, and other soft skills that you gained abroad in the skills section of your resume. So there's lots of different places to put this in. If you're not exactly sure how to approach it, or you need help with a resume in general, the career office at your institution will be happy to help you with that. So I would encourage you to reach out to them. We'll take a look at a couple of examples for what this can look like on your resume. You'll see here, Maria has her resume put together, and she has included her study abroad at Bocconi in Milan, Italy, in the education section. And what she chose to highlight here was that she has Italian language proficiency, she took intensive economics while she was there, and it was an immersive cross-cultural experience. Maybe those are the transferable skills she's identified that feel most relevant to whatever the position is that she's applying to. And so that's a neat, orderly, and relevant way to include that experience right at the top of your resume in the education section. Or, in addition, here in this version, it's still listed study abroad under the education section, and Maria has also added a specific research project that she did at Bocconi to her experience section. And there, just like any other experience, she's included a few bullet points to really highlight what she learned to do and the types of skills that she developed in the course of that research project. Developing a comprehensive report, collaborating actively, and she was able to highlight that it was within a diverse and multilingual team. And that's one of those really unique elements that you can get from an international experience that's great to showcase on your resume. And finally, this is what Maria's resume would look like if she also wanted to have an international experience section where she's just listing her experience outside of the United States. Maybe it's an employer that's looking for that or that has asked for that information. And so she's listed her study abroad there in addition to some personal travel. And finally, under skills, she's highlighted again that she has that Italian language level A2. And she's also talked about being highly adaptable, a creative problem solver, and effective within cross-cultural teams as some soft skills that she wants to point out on her resume. Now, these may come from study abroad. They may come from any number of other experiences that she's had as well. But if she were to put this on her resume here, she'd want to be sure that she had a few examples in mind. So that if someone said, oh, I see that you wrote here that you're highly adaptable as a skill. Can you give me an example of that? That's where you want to have those 2 or 3 great stories just sort of in your back pocket that you're prepared to share with a potential employer if they ask for it. And those could easily be drawn from her experience at Bocconi. So those are just a few examples of how you might want to incorporate your study abroad experience on a resume. Again, it looks a little bit different for different people or what you really want to highlight in terms of your skills. So feel free to work with a career advisor at your own institution for help on how to do that just right for you. Now, another place that you want to really be able to professionalize that study abroad experience and communicate those transferable skills is, of course, on a cover letter, which you'll often have to submit when applying for a job or an internship. Now, the purpose of a cover letter is to illustrate your fit for a particular position, demonstrate your knowledge of the employer, and really specifically connect your qualifications to exactly what they're seeking. It's also a good opportunity to demonstrate any unique personal qualities that you can bring to the position that may or may not appear on your resume. Let me show you a few examples here of how study abroad experience could be incorporated as part of a cover letter. Here are some short excerpts where someone has chosen to say, my experience studying and living in Ecuador has well equipped me to communicate effectively with diverse populations, a skill set that is critical for this position in your global human resources department. So do you see how they covered each point that we've talked about in this process? First, they reflected, they identified that skill, they connected it to what's transferable about it, right, which is communicating with diverse populations, and they have connected that directly to what the employer is seeking. And they've professionalized it beautifully by incorporating that sentence in their cover letter. Another example is, my studies in China provided me with great insight into the cultural differences that influence consumers in different countries and have prepared me to contribute to international marketing strategies. And finally, Having readily adjusted to an unfamiliar environment in France and continually adapted to changing plans in the midst of the COVID pandemic abroad, I am confident that my flexibility and my ability to remain clear-headed in high-pressure situations have prepared me to perform well in a very fast-paced environment. So those are just a few examples there of ways that people can incorporate their study abroad experience effectively into a cover letter. This will, of course, look different for everyone based on your experience and your writing style and the type of job that you're applying for. So it's another great opportunity to touch base with your career office for help in drafting your own letters. And so that's it. We have now walked through our 3-step process to reflect on your study abroad experience and what you learned from it, to connect that to transferable skills that are relevant to the job or employer that interests you, and then to professionalize that content and really communicate it clearly and convincingly to that potential employer.
And now, as we wrap up, we want to provide you some suggestions for looking to the future and give some resources as you begin your career planning and, again, figure out how to integrate your study abroad experience into your future path and keep that experience fresh. So, in regards to thinking through future opportunities, we encourage you to connect with your career and internship offices at your respective institutions and explore options independently as well as you consider next steps. You might want to think about graduate school abroad, community service opportunities, international fellowship programs, or maybe you want to consider taking an online TEFL certificate course, which can really help you and open up a lot of opportunities for pursuing work abroad. And we encourage you to keep your study abroad experience fresh. Communicate regularly with the contacts that you made abroad. Don't lose the language. You can use language learning apps such as Duolingo or Babbel, or even sign up for language courses for adults or within your community. Volunteer with your study abroad office for an info session, info table, or panel, and stay engaged with study abroad discussion groups that perhaps your study abroad office at your home institution moderates. Make sure your memories from study abroad are documented and shared. If you don't have a blog, maybe start one now where you can share all of your past memories from when you went abroad. Join a language or culture group. You can access many online communities, or you can even find a cultural center in your area that might be hosting events and allow you to connect with others and speak in the language of the country in which you studied. Visit the International Student Center at your institution. Often there are great opportunities to attend events at your International Student Center and connect maybe with students who are originally from the country in which you studied abroad. Help others on a travel forum. That sounds like something very simplistic, but can be a really great way to keep reminding yourself of the challenges that you encountered while you were abroad, and use that knowledge and understanding to help others who are traveling. And take a look at virtual city tours and virtual museum tours as well, and other ways that you can still engage even from your own home. Integrate your experience into academics at your home institution. So you might want to consider thesising or using an independent study project to further explore a topic that interested you while abroad. And maybe that can help you further down the road if you want to still continue with researching or working in those communities that you connected with while you were abroad. You can use your experience abroad as another lens through which you approach your major studies. Maybe you want to apply the concepts you're learning in your political science course to what's happening with the political situation in the country in which you studied abroad. And that can not only offer a unique perspective for the others in your class, but again, open many doors to pursue future research and work related to that topic, and also, again, ensure that you are still able to document what you learned and use that moving forward in many different ways throughout your professional career. And we also want to leave you with some final resources. So like we mentioned, your institution's study abroad and career offices are a great resource. Many of them have online resources for writing cover letters, writing your elevator pitch, editing your resume. Many have workshops as well related to these topics and have the availability to meet with you via appointment to talk through your unique experiences and skills. We also have some links to some great general resources, which we will provide in a handout in the FAIR platform for you today. And some of the resources linked on this handout will be related to using your experience in your job search, aligning study abroad with your future employment, resilient traveling, tips for unexpected and early reentry if your experience was unfortunately cut short, and many additional resources for learning how to reflect on your time abroad and really leverage that experience abroad. And for those of you who did unfortunately need to end your experiences early, we recommend that you watch Lucy Hone's TED Talk about the 3 secrets of resilient people and consider practices to build your resilience moving forward. You might want to think about how you can acknowledge the situation as a part of life and work toward acceptance, or think about what Lucy talks about as selectional attention, focusing on things you can change and that you do have control over, or also asking yourself, is what I'm doing helping or harming me? And these questions can be powerful and really give you a better sense of control over your thoughts and your feelings. Choosing not to believe negative thoughts that might color your thoughts during this difficult time, and consciously recognize that your thoughts may be influenced by emotions and may not be an accurate picture of reality. And finally, we will leave you with some contact information for the career centers at your various institutions. And we really hope that you will explore their websites and engage with them as you move forward with your professional journeys. Thank you very much for all of your attention today. We really appreciate the time you took to work through these exercises with us and to really think about how you can present yourself moving forward in your professional search, and really, again, leverage that experience you had while you were abroad, regardless of how long or short it was. Thank you very much.